One of the ways I always describe managing is if you think of a corporation, there's a board of directors. The board makes the decisions on the direction of the company, and then the CEO executes on what the board wants to have happen. And as a manager, you're the CEO and the band or artist is the board, and they're guiding your direction. So they give you the guidelines for what your job is, and then you have to follow it. It's not your choice in what the direction is. You can try to have influence on that, but it's their business. They're the owners, not you.
You're listening to Creatives Prevail, unraveling the stories of creative professionals.
Hello, everyone, and welcome to Creatives Prevail. I'm your host, Mike Zimmerlich, and my next guest is artist manager and business consultant, Randy Nichols. We talk about his experience managing bands like Underoath, The Starting Line, and Say Anything, and why honesty and communication is so important in establishing trust. We also talk about consulting tech companies in the music space. Let's get into it. Hey, Randy, how's it going?
Good. How you been?
Doing good. Thanks. I really do appreciate it. Thank you so much for being on the show. It's interesting because I've seen you do actually quite a bit of podcasts before. So this is definitely not your first foray. In fact, we discussed about the fact that it's like, let's just jump into it and just see how things go. But I know that, you talked a lot about all different types of things lately. So especially when it comes to the live music scene. So have you always been like passionate about live music?
Yeah, I mean, I've been passionate about it as long as I can remember. Like, I think the first concert I ever went to, I was probably 5 or 6 years old, and just, always been a huge important part of my life. So, just it's changed over time. Like when I was a little kid, like my dad took me to a Ramones concert when I was 5 or 6 years old, and my mom took me to a Harry Chapin concert. Those are like the first two things I ever went to, which are both just like awesome things to get your start around live music. And like staying totally on brand too. The Ramones concert didn't even happen because there was a riot. So like
Oh,
it's just like,
wow.
yeah, which is kind of awesome though. Like my dad gave me some of the best advice I've ever gotten in my life because like we were like hiding off in a corner because there was a riot because they canceled the show. And I said, Dad, I want to see the riot. And he said, Son, you don't watch a riot. You're either in it or you get the heck out of the way. And like
That is
it's
actually
just
really good advice.
some maybe the only good advice my dad ever gave me, but was some good advice.
Yeah, exactly. So I'm curious though, because, okay, so you obviously got into live music very at an early age, but was there a point in time when you realized that you wanted to get like into management specifically?
No, and it's actually I'll keep the story short because I've told it a handful of times out there, but the short version of the story is I was a talent agent as my first job and kind of interned in a bunch of different areas. That ended up being the pathway to the first job I could have in the business. The agency I was at kind of collapsed. I was the agent for a band called the Pilfers, which is this like reggae ska punk band. And as the company collapsed, I told the lead singer, who was this older Jamaican dude who I loved, told him I can't be your agent anymore. And, I'm sorry, but, I'm out basically. And he turned to me and just said, No, now you're the manager. Your first job is to get an agent, as he said in like his tough guy Jamaican accent. And that is how I became a manager. It was not something that was on the roadmap of like, this is where I want to go, what I want to have happen. He told me. And every once in a while, I run into him to this day. And every time I see him, he has a huge smile on his face. It's like, I told you you're a manager. And he's right. Like, I give him full credit, but there was no plan to be a manager.
But then, so that's really interesting though, because there's one thing where somebody thrusts you into the position, but there's another thing to then own that position. So what do you feel were the attributes that helped you have such a long career as in management specifically?
I think a lot of it's communication and empathy. It's and you obviously have to have a business mind as well, but it's just understanding what's driving people to think a certain way, trying to understand why quite often their motivations maybe damaging themselves and convincing them of why their idea that may sound good on the surface is really a bad idea. And that's where empathy comes into it, is like, I get wanting to just kind of burn the bridges and give the middle finger and run, but there's reasons sometimes why you need to be strategic and walk away slowly and let the bridge collapse and not let anyone know that you helped it collapse versus bombing it. It's like little things like that. You could still achieve the same goals but do it differently.
I love how you position that, because as an artist manager myself, it is very challenging to have that balance where your job is to essentially look out for your artist's best interests, but sometimes that is difficult to do because you don't want to impede upon their own artistic vision. But sometimes, though, as you mentioned, is that if the artistic vision is actually going to hinder them or hurt them because of that reason, you it's hard for you to come in and say, hey, you know, this might not necessarily be a good idea for X, Y, and Z reasons. And I know sometimes artists, for an artist, that's sometimes hard to take in too, right? Because are you like trying to hinder their own creativity? Are you trying to hinder what they believe in, right? In comparison to that, you're just trying to keep them safe.
Yeah, and the key thing is also not to have an ego with it all. So,
Yeah.
like, I'll give a great example. I managed a band called The Starting Line for many years, and I'll never forget this meeting that we had, sitting literally on a bench in front of it was either Geffen or MCA Records, same company, Universal Music Group. They changed names so many times while the band was signed to the label, and the label was trying to force down their throat the big name producer at the time, whoever it was. I want to say it was Neil Avron, who had just done Yellow Card and Fall Out Boy, like whoever. I may be getting the names wrong, but I think it was Neil. And the band was passionate that they wanted to go in like the cooler indie producer vibe and didn't want to be forced to do, what the label thought was right. And I sat with them and I said, look, if you want these kinds of successes, like radio hits and all these things, you should probably follow the advice of the label to get these people who that's what they deliver. If your goal is to just stay 100% true to your art and nothing else and no compromise, then follow the path that you want. And I still remember sitting there and saying, look, you could be the next MXPX or you could be the next Fallout Boy. It's your choice. And I said, whichever path you choose, I'm going to respect and I'm going to support you. But decisions like this and this moment will dictate where you go next. And the important thing is, as a manager, regardless of which path they choose, you can't suddenly come back to them and say, I told you so. Look, you thought you were going to have this and now you got that. And whichever path, they could be like, I want to be the next, MXPX and screw up and become a big band and be upset about that potentially too. It's like, we want to stay underground. So like whatever it is, you have to respect the direction that the talent wants to go. And one of the ways I always describe managing is, if you think of a corporation, there's a board of directors. The board makes the decisions on the direction of the company. And then the CEO executes on what the board wants to have happen. And as a manager, you're the CEO and the band or artist is the board, and they're guiding your direction. So they give you the guidelines for what your job is, and then you have to follow it. It's not your choice in what the direction is. You can try to have influence on that, but it's their business. They're the owners, not you.
That's a very good point. I love that analogy of a CEO and a board, because you're right. You are going in their direction. You essentially are the ultimate executor. Now, of course, as you mentioned, you also give them guidance and advice, or at least weighing the options, right? As you mentioned before, hey, you can go down this path or this path, but either one in particular, these are the pros and cons depending upon which direction you want to go. But at the end of the day, it's your decision. And I'm a very big believer in that as well, is that you lay out the options so that they can make the decision clear for themselves. And then whatever decision that they make, that's the direction you have to go forward. And I tried to explain this to others who want to get into artist management is, at the end of the day, and you mentioned about ego and setting that aside, the way I also look at it is, if you can't trust the artist's vision or the artist's decision making abilities, you shouldn't be working with them to begin with. To be perfectly honest, like you have to have that. The trust goes both ways.
Yeah, absolutely. And it's important to understand too that you have ideas of how to run a business, but at the end of the day, each business is going to operate differently. Like my managing Say Anything to Bayside to Underoath to Starting Line, each one of those bands were so different in the business, not just musically. You know, they may have fell into like an overall genre of like alternative, like Warp Tour music or something. But at the end of the day, each one of those businesses operate very differently and have very different goals based on both where you want the business to go and what is right for those human beings involved in the business. You know, you could have one artist that should be on the road grinding it out all the time, and another artist who's just being on the road isn't right for them. And they could musically sound very similar, but you have to build the plan that is right for that specific artist, not how you think the business should run.
Let's. I do want to talk about real quick about the difference between working because you worked in management under a company and then also had your own company too. So can you talk about the differences between those two things and like you don't have to necessarily do pros and cons specifically, but what made you decide to go off on your own?
So I had my own business initially, and I've over time partnered with a few different people. And my first was my own business as a manager, and I partnered with my friends who ran Drive Through Records. We started a management company. There was issues with the band being too connected to the record company, even though I operated independently. There were some issues, so we went and left that partnership. A couple of years later, I merged with Red Light Management and operated out of New York and with their office in New York, which I helped to open and launch the New York office for Red Light Management. And in that scenario, I wouldn't say that very much changed from being independent to joining their company. I ran my business the way I always run my business is the artist is the boss and we make decisions based on what's best for them. At times there may have been a couple of extra resources of different people to call to get an opinion from, but it's kind of same it always is. Like I got insight and opinions from people inside the company and outside the company, but nobody once in my 6 years at Red Light Management told me I need to, do a deal with any specific company or I can't do something or I can't do things myself. And, like being fully transparent, in the red light era, one of the first things they tried to do was sell me to have my bands use the merch company that the company owned a large share of. And I told them why I didn't want to work with them and why I was going to keep working with the company that I loved. And the owner of the company flew to New York and met with the company that I didn't want to leave because he heard what I had to say. I was like, this is interesting. I want to learn more about them. So it's more just having an ally around versus somebody telling me what to do. The only thing I will say is with Red Light in particular, there were some things as my contract was coming to a close. There were some things where like they were like, hey, we think, you should have one staff rather than two staff working for you because they were trying to decrease the overhead they were spending on my deal as my deal was winding down. And that's business. That it has nothing to
Right.
do with how I operated on the day to day. So like we had disagreements on that. They honored the deal as it was, set to begin with. We all honored our deal and kept doing what we were doing. But other than that, like, and then I went independent again and my business ran exactly the same. I, about 2.5 years ago, merged my management company with Fly South Music. And I predominantly did that because my awesome day to day manager who worked with me for many years, she left to do something else and I needed additional support. I could replace her or I could try something different and use some of the shared services from another management company. Merge that with Fly South. No one at Fly South ever told me what to do other than, like I had their person there, Melissa, who runs merchandise for Fly South. She would give me advice on what to do with my merchandise business because I had a person on the staff to help with merchandise. They had a digital strategy person who could help me with getting social content posted, but it was still the same thing that we were doing. I just had someone else doing it and would get some advice from time to time. But again, no different than anything else. So any deal you do in partnering with another company in artist management, nobody should be telling you what to do. They're a partner.
And I gotta admire that fact about yourself is that it sounds like throughout your entire career, you found who were the right people to match with you at that particular point in time. And like you said, have that essentially that mutual respect where they give you essentially its autonomy to make the decisions that you need to make. But in addition to that, you also have the support of each other alongside it.
Yeah, it's just connecting with good, like minded people. And, the key thing is if you're trying to do a partnership with another management company because you want payroll from them, then you work for them. You are not an independent manager. You're asking them to hire you to be an employee. And the moment you ask someone to hire you to be an employee, you work for them and they're the boss. And then you have to respect what their opinion is. So if you're working for a management company and an opportunity comes along for an artist that you think isn't right, and that company is short sighted and just wants to get paid today and get the commission on the deal, then they could guide you wrongly because they want that and push you really hard and have leverage on you because you're taking their money. And they've got every right to apply that leverage because one, maybe you have bad instincts, and two, they have an overhead to cover. So, the key is to have partners rather than bosses everywhere you can.
No, I totally agree. I'm a very big believer in that as well. Is that I rather have that partnership and still be able to make the decisions I want to do. That's why I have my own company, is for that exact same reason. I rather partner up with somebody, but still able to have those decisions be ultimately mine. But then I also own those decisions too, whether they're the right or the wrong decisions.
Exactly.
And I've always been a big believer in that. I mean, look, at the end of the day, if somebody tells me to jump and I have to jump, I'll do so. I'll set my ego aside. But it's also very interesting too, right? Speaking of ego, we talked about before about still making sure that we are not impeding upon others to making these decisions, as we talked about before with bands. But the same token too, we still also like our freedom to make decisions as well. It's a kind of interesting dynamic.
Oh, completely. And in the moment, you're like, fucking asshole, doesn't want to let us do what we think is right for them. And at the end of the day, it doesn't matter.
Yeah.
Like, if it's their business, like, you can be furious. And believe me, I can list you 100 different times that I've been furious that my client has made a decision. But the key is you work for them and you got to respect what they want. And if you can't respect that, the relationship's not going to last. There's a reason that I've held on to clients for 20 plus years. It's because when I'm right, I don't sit there and like tell them they were wrong. And when I'm wrong, I own it. Like it's that simple. And like you ask some of my clients, they'll tell you when I was wrong that I'm making excuses, and like everyone's gonna have those moments. But my feeling, and I'll stand to it, is there's times that I know I was wrong and I admit it, and there's times where they just didn't understand the situation and said I'm wrong. And we'll disagree on those. And that's fine. And that's fine too, as long as we can be respectful in it.
Absolutely. And that's the whole point, right? Is that you may have a disagreement and so forth, but I think it's important to understand that it comes down to good intentions. At the end of the day, you had good intentions as far as what you thought was going to be the right move to make in comparison. So I think that's very important and to understand as well. You can have a disagreement, but at the end of the day, it does matter intentions. And also, again, like we're talking about before, about the fact that you are trying to look out for their best interests, including putting out fires, by the way. And I was just kind of curious if you don't have to necessarily say the name, but do you have a good story of a fire that you had to put out?
Yeah, I never have a problem naming names. I'll give a really great example, and that would be Underoath on the Warp Tour in, I think it was 2006, when Define the Great Line came out, and things were just not good on tour. There were rumors that Spencer, their singer, was doing coke on the road every day, which were not true, although he did have a drug problem, but not during the tour. And just a lot of rumors, a lot of problems, huge breakdown between the band. And it kind of came to a head thanks to someone at our record company who basically, rather than trying to fix the problem, just poured gasoline on the fire. Like literally, there was like little bits of tension, and he called a meeting when the band was on the road and attacked the singer and had everyone else attack him and made things incredibly worse. And I got a phone call from Spencer, their singer, and I was like, all right, this is bad. And I was sitting in my office in my house, went up to my room, packed, a toothbrush and toothpaste and all the basics and a change of clothes, threw it in a backpack and started driving to the airport without even having a flight while I was on the phone with him. Called my day-to-day manager and said, can you please book me a flight? It's the only time in my career I've asked someone to book a flight for me too. I always take care of travel and things myself. But I said, I'm driving to the airport and I'm on phone calls. Can you just book me a flight so I don't have to stop? Got to the airport, sat on the runway for 6 hours because of thunderstorms, and was trying to hold a meeting with the band to keep them on the tour. Band would not do that. I called Kevin Lyman, who owned the Warped Tour, and said, can you go sit down with the band and talk to them to get them to at least continue on the tour until tomorrow? Kevin called me while I was sitting on the runway still, said, I talked to your band. The only way there's a chance of them continuing to be a band is for them to go home. And he gave his blessing for them to leave the Warped Tour. I finally got on the plane. Finally took off, got to Pittsburgh at like midnight, 1 a.m. or something. It was like a dystopian scene from some kind of movie. All the dirt and crap left over from Warped Tour was in the parking lot, but no other buses, stages, anything. Just their bus and everybody standing around outside. Got on the bus, drove with them from Pittsburgh to Florida, and slowly got conversations going. And which was my ultimate goal of getting out there. And like, I still remember, like when I got there, everybody hated Spencer. Nobody would talk to him, and everyone had just ostracized him. And while we were just driving down the highway, I was talking to him in the bunks area of the bus, and we thought it was just the two of us and no one else was there. He said something, I truly can't remember what it was, and Aaron, the drummer, opened up like his curtain in his bunk, and we're like, oh, didn't know he was there. He goes, I wish you said that, yesterday. If you did, we wouldn't be going home right now. And that moment started the conversation to get everyone talking. It was a long process of weeks going down to Florida, getting everybody to talk. The last step of it all was I literally flew to Florida for 4 weeks straight, every week holding a meeting with the band. The last meeting, we were sitting in a room in a hotel, like a hotel suite or whatever, all talking. And I said something to the effect of, I thought you guys were different, after seeing what you're doing and how you're acting, all the crap that people like Fat Mike said about you and you being closed-minded religious freaks. I'm like, I was fooled by you. I thought you were special and I thought you were different. And I got up and gave them all a hug goodbye and walked out of the room. And 2 days later, Tim called me pretty much in tears, telling me that I was right about everything I said and that he wanted to, correct what he had done wrong and that he was just as bad as Spencer.
Wow.
So long story, but that, is what you do when putting out a fire. I didn't show up on the bus and tell them they were wrong. I didn't attack them. I didn't tell them they had to stay. I just sat around and listened. And through listening, other people heard. And through other people hearing, it created communication. And I reached a breaking point too, as you heard in that story. I was just like, screw it. I'm going to say what I really believe and just walk out of the room. And I believed that in that moment. I was like, wow, I thought they were special. I thought they were different. And, all those steps are important. And I didn't come in with a different tactic each day. It's not like I was like, all right, well, this tactic didn't work, so now I'm on to this one. The only tactic was just communication and love for humans and trying to make things better.
Wow. What was going through your mind at the time that you decided that I'm going to drop literally everything and get on a flight? Because that, I mean, I get that. I totally understand that you have that kind of compassion, your instinct is I need to be there because this is a major problem right now, and I need to physically be there. But what was going through your mind at that point in time that made you make that decision to just go on a plane and fly?
Okay, so to set the story even more, it was a week, maybe 2 weeks after their record Define the Great Line came out. The record sold 100,000 copies first week, was number 2 on the Billboard charts behind Nelly Furtado in her peak. And it was basically like, one, this is an important band. Two, this is how I make my living. Like, they're going to take this away from, take my living away from me. And honestly, the most important piece of it all is I believed in what they were doing and I cared. And I are we really gonna destroy this over nonsense? This is something special that everyone created together, and it's okay to end something that's special. I could share that conversation with the starting line that I went through years later, but it was something that was important, and I don't want to let something important die. And I could be wrong, but I feel like if I didn't get on that bus and accidentally force people to talk, that they may have gotten home and been so closed off to each other that they didn't want to get in the room and have a conversation. So the first conversations happened because everybody was trapped in a bus. I basically sat on a bus for a 24-hour straight conversation with no sleep, just talk, to get people to start to understand each other. I mean, I literally got off the bus, went to the airport, and flew back home again. It was just insane, but
Wow.
it was the right thing to do in the moment, and that's what matters.
Yeah. Absolutely. It's yeah. I mean, are there, and again, you don't have to necessarily give an examples. I know you're okay with it, but are there any times that you realize that, okay, this is just, is there are there signs that okay, this is the time that you need to move on from this particular artist or this particular project?
Yeah, I can give that example really clearly, and it was with the starting line about 3 years ago. I'd managed them for I think 22 years. They're like family to me still, and they're the best way I could describe it is with the starting line, Kenny was a couple of years younger than everybody else, and he wrote everything. He was the brilliance behind the band. No disrespect to everyone else. I think they would all say the same thing. And Kenny, as a kid, never really got to have any say or do what he wanted because everyone was 19, 20 years old, and he was 16 years old. At that age, it's such a massive difference. When you're older, it's different. And the band was just kind of set on a path where Kenny's voice was minimized for many, many years. And when Kenny gained a voice, it created this scenario where there was some resentment against me. And I don't think it was personal. I love him to death to this day. But it was almost rather than a partner, I was almost like dad to him. And he loved his dad, but he was rebelling against dad. And we just couldn't see eye to eye. And it reached a point where it was damaging the relationships between each other in the band and me with Ken. And there are a couple of things that happened on a call, which I don't want to call out just because it's too personal for people. But basically, somebody lied on a call and said that I didn't say something that they wanted me to say because they were trying to get me to speak up for what I truly believed is right, and they did too, and sided with Kenny against me to kind of protect the band. And at that moment, I texted that band member. I was like, we're done. We need to work on finding a new manager. It's not going to work anymore. And he had known that we were getting to that point already too. But I wasn't done as a screw you. Like that member who said something that I stand by, and he disagrees with me to some degree, but like he lied to protect the band, which is what he should do too. The band is more important than the manager. And I was just like, this is done. This doesn't make sense. These are my friends. And if I don't have the ability to lead anymore, why am I here?
Yep. Yeah, that's really tough when you come to that realization. And you're right. As at the end of the day, if you're not being effective anymore, it's just time to move on. And like you said too, I appreciate the fact that you mentioned that they're your friends. It's really hard to not have a personal relationship with these people, right? When you're seeing them so often, especially when you have such a long career, a long partnership with them, it's hard not to develop a personal relationship with these people. And you have to come. Yes, it is a business at the end of the day, but also at the same token, you do get close to these people, and you also, like you said, it's like when it comes to the point where you know that you're no longer going to be involved, it's hard to make that decision.
Yeah, it's really hard. And like to add to that, like I didn't just make the decision to walk away. Like I said, these people are like family to me. So it was who can lead that can get the trust and respect from all of you, because that's what we need. And I literally brainstormed with the band who would be a person that they would trust. I set up meetings for them with other managers. I didn't just say, I'm out, like isn't working anymore. I was part of my replacement. And, again, using the corporation analogy, the board of directors sometimes decides it's time for a change, this time, and sometimes the CEO decides it's time for a change. But
Yep.
they don't throw up middle fingers and say, screw you most of the time. They worked together and we found a replacement. We said, when we found the replacement, we said that new guy will come in at the beginning of next year. I'll work through the end of this year and begin a transition. And the very last show that I was their manager for was they do these holiday shows in late December every year. And I still remember, like, the majority of us all walked out of the club together at the end of the night. The last people in the club, again, like a scene out of a movie, like practically hand in hand, but not literally, saying goodbye, giving each other hugs, and getting into our cars and driving away. And to be clear, like the fact that it wasn't all of us, nothing personal with the other ones, it was just like the core of us friends who were closest over the years spent the most time together that night. No ill will from the other people who weren't there. And it was just like, all right, we're done. And like, it was great. Like, it doesn't have to be ego. It doesn't, like, everything isn't somebody's fault. Sometimes life evolves. And, to be honest, like, these things hurt. Like, you could probably even tell, like, listening to me, like, I'm sad about these things. Like, I'm not happy they happened, but we can live our lives blaming people and angry, or we can be thankful for the awesome stuff we did and just, learn from the things that didn't work.
Absolutely. I do want to ask you though, kind of switching it up a little bit, is do you have a favorite moment that you remember?
Probably my favorite moment is oddly one of the moments that I was most angry. If you go 5 minutes later than my favorite moment. So there was a festival called Skate and Surf Festival in New Jersey. It was the precursor to Bamboozle. Majority of the same people who did Bamboozle did Skate and Surf, and huge festival in the Asbury Park Convention Center. And the starting line were headlining one of the nights there. And there was somewhere between 5,000 and 7,000 people in this room singing along to every word of theirs. And it was like the band just kept going up and up and up. And this was probably in a lot of ways the peak moment. And it was amazing. And much like I feel like their career was, the amazing moment was just destroyed by some outside party that had nothing to do with anything. And in this scenario, it was The venue decided for some reason that the show was over mid set. Like, band was playing, they shut off the power to the PA, and they're like, that's it, you're done. And I don't remember the reasons. There was some kind of reason, I'm sure, whether it was a safety issue or a curfew issue. All these things have reasons. It's not like they were just like, let's go mess with the starting line and shut
Right.
down
There's
the show.
usually a reason. Yeah.
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 But it was like the peak moment, that like, goosebumps moment, straight through to that. And then like in that like angering moment, I was fighting with the stage crew and security, whoever on stage, to the point where the band came up to me and said, "It's okay, Randy, let's get out of here." And it was just like, and like, I sort of, as much as I hate that moment of where it ended, I kind of love it, because it's like, I did everything I could. They knew I did everything I could. They loved me for what I was doing. And it was like, all right, we got to go. So like that very moment was like, kind of like good to see the respect from because the client never appreciates you in a bad moment. In a bad moment, it's always your fault. And in a good moment, it's always them. And it was one of those rare moments where like they didn't take responsibility, and it's not their responsibility that it went bad, but they saw what I was doing for them, and they're like, all right, no more. Like, let's just accept this.
That was essentially their way of appreciating what you were doing.
Exactly.
Because of how much you were fighting more about it than they were. So
yeah, and there is actually, yeah. So I got to tell you one other favorite story too. So I managed to Say Anything for a handful of years. They fired me. Like, Max Bemis, adore him. I think he'd be the first to say he's a very difficult person to manage. I don't think I was fired for any rational reason, although I understand kind of what led to it. Much like the starting line thing, like things happened in his life where it was evolving in that direction. But I was definitely bitter. And Underoath was playing right down the road from them. Like, Underoath was opening, I think, at Asbury Park Convention Center, oddly enough, and left there on my way home, and Say Anything was headlining at Starland Ballroom in New Jersey. I'm like, I'm just going to pop my head in and say hello, because Kenny was playing bass for Say Anything on that tour. And I was like, things have been weird, but whatever. I'm going to pop my head in. And walked in the venue while the band was already on stage, was standing on the side of the stage. And one by one, every band member came to give me a hug, hello, during their set. And then literally mid-song, Max saw that I was there. While he was singing, he goes, "Randy's here." And like continued the song. And it was just like those moments, like it's meaningful. Like, it's like,
yeah.
If I hated him for all those things, or he hated me for the reasons that we split up, it could have been a very different scenario. But like, there was a true appreciation in that moment. It just goes to just being honest, good people. Like, even in bad, you could find good. And like, that's another one of those moments where, like, oddly enough, it all spans out of bad things. But it's like, I feel like, like, you find out who your friends are in the bad moments, not the good moments.
I wouldn't even say that was necessarily bad things. I think that is conflict.
Yeah.
And I think that that's the most important aspect, is that you will have conflict, right? In any relationship, you will have conflict. The important part is the resolution of that conflict. What happens after the fact? And I think that, like you mentioned before, good people will find that resolution and still have that, ideally, that mutual respect with each other, right? And still be happy to see you and still be excited to see you because of those reasons, right? And I think that that's the biggest thing, right? Is conflict.
No, and it really is. And, to drill down a little further with the Say Anything story, keeping it short, but like, ultimately, Max, suffered from various mental illness problems that are very public. So I'm not saying anything out of line. And when I started managing him, everything I did was like me and his mom and his aunt, like almost like planning for him. Like, he kind of had no control over his life. And he was in this process of getting healthy, getting his life together. And I feel like, he told me he fired me for something else, but I truly feel like deep down, he fired me because I was aligned to everything that was wrong with the past and not representing the future. And he needed to take control of his life in order to be healthy. And I saw it and understood it and respected it. So like you have to understand like your place doesn't belong in these things forever, and that's okay. I went to go see Say Anything last year for the 20th anniversary of Say Anything as a Real Boy record. Had an amazing night with like my wife and I went. We hung out with Max and his whole family, and like it's just like we're tied together for life, whether we want it or not. Like Max played "I Want to Know Your Plans" as the first dance at my wedding, acoustic, which was also the first performance he played after leaving a mental health facility for 6 months. Like we're just so tied, and like I mean, I I couldn't be prouder of all these things that, have kind of like pieced my life together. And I feel like some people look at all these things at only how they end rather than how they existed.
Yeah, I completely agree. I do want to talk about what you're currently doing now. And I've noticed that you've been advising tech companies for a while now, but made it, I think, not necessarily more official, but that's been a little bit more of your focus lately. And you done advisements for many companies. You were involved in bands in town a while ago at Venue, things like that too. So can you talk a little bit more about why you made the decision to start working with tech companies?
So there's two things, and I think two things can be true at once. Like I think like my relevance as an artist manager, I think decreased over time. And, I think that happens. I'm 53 years old. Like, how do I truly connect with a 20-year-old kid in the next up and coming band? Like, it's really difficult for that to happen. And so I think that plays into it. I didn't necessarily want to be the manager who's managing all the washed up scene bands who still have a little bit of business left. I don't want to name names there because these are my friends. I'm not saying it in a derogatory way, but I'm very excited about progress and something new versus living in the past. So over all my years of managing bands, I'd always have these tech companies that would come pitch me to have my artists use their products, and I built relationships with them, and I really love that. And it's very similar to managing bands. It's you have the board of directors who are these companies, although sometimes there's investors, but early on quite often there's not. It's their company, and they're just looking for advice, and it's the same exact thing that I do in music. It's helping my friends achieve a goal. And I definitely, to some degree, got bored with managing bands. And, some of it is the interpersonal, mental health side of it. It's just, it gets trying after a while. And, stopping people from doing, what's wrong and trying to protect them and just watching them make the wrong decisions time and time again. It really becomes difficult on yourself. So like I think some of it is, I don't want to say a failure in management, but a failure to want to find a new path to win. And this other opportunity in wanting to build businesses in a very similar way to what we did with music, and having some self-doubt as to whether I could be relevant in building a new music business today. Like I understand music, I love new bands, but it's such a personal thing for me too that don't know that I could have that same relationship with like a 20-year-old kid today that I could when I was, 5, 6 years older than these bands.
See, I don't see that as failure. I see that as adapting or and changing to what you feel that is important to you. And it's not necessarily even saying that arts management is no longer important to you. You just realize that you were looking for something different and wanted to still make a difference, but in the way that you wanted to make the difference. And you discovered that through the years of talking to tech companies, and then took your skills that you built all these years and now just applied it somewhere else that you feel what matters to you now, or where you feel like you can make the most impact.
Yeah, and thank you. I appreciate you saying that. And I'm still in management a tiny bit. I manage one artist on Big Loud Rock, called Sicarus. I couldn't imagine totally walking away from it. It's so
I don't
much
think you
of
ever
like,
can. I
yeah,
don't think you ever can.
it's just something that I love, and I love his songs, and he's an awesome person, and I enjoy working with him, and it's really like more about the process and being involved than even like, okay, I'm a manager and I'm commissioning this and making money. It's like really like, and honestly, like I've been managing him for like 9 months. I haven't been paid a dime by him. And I'm not saying this in a like, he's screwing me. It's just like, I want to grow this into something and then we'll worry about that. So like, I still have a little bit of that in me because it's important. Like I love that. And I'm on the board of an organization called NITO, which is the National Independent Talent Organization. And I'm able to use what I've learned from managing and in various other projects to help shape the future of the industry and fight for things that are important. Like I go down the rabbit hole on this on every podcast, so let's try not to go there on this, but fighting ticket scalping is something that's really
Yes.
important to me. It's damaging artists and fans and the entire live music ecosystem, and I found a platform through that to protect artists and fans through this organization that's had me meet with, the Department of Justice and senators and state legislators. And like, I love having the ability to drive change. And like, I often say lately that like I'm delusional enough to believe that I'm making a difference. And, am I? I'm not sure, but honestly, I'm delusional enough to think that I actually am. And a lot of the things that have happened positively in the last 2 years are because of work I'm doing, and not solely me, but how I'm approaching these things is different than anyone has in the past. And then I'm sharing that information and the tools that I've gained from it with a bunch of other people who are working in the space. And we're changing the game. And laws are being introduced around the country to outlaw scalping. And I'm, like I said, crazy enough to think that I'm a huge part of that. So, like, that stuff motivates me a lot.
So we're going to wrap up things here, but I wanted to just say, Randy, that you are making a difference. And the reason why I'm confident in saying this, I mean, we only know each other. We don't like, just for context, we don't really know each other that well. Like, we've met like once or twice, and that's
Yeah, we're
about
just
it.
getting to know each other still.
We're just starting to get to start to know each
Great,
other.
this is a
Right.
great conversation doing that. People are listening to us together, kind of get to know each other.
Exactly. So I just want to make sure that people are aware of this, is that I don't like, we are just getting to know each other. And I can say this with confidence because of the stories that you've told. And you wouldn't be making a difference if you didn't have artists being glad, again, going back to what we were talking about before, glad that you were there and giving you a hug and appreciating you there and being involved in your life in that way. You are making a difference, and that can be on a global level, national level, local level, and just one person. But I assure you, you're making a difference in people's lives, and I admire you so much that you continue that approach, that you want to still be involved and you still want to make an impact as large as humanly possible. And I think that's the truth, is that it's the we think we're always crazy about thinking that we can make a difference, but I think those are the people that actually do make change happen.
Yeah, well, thank you. And, like, honestly, this is a great conversation. I was dreading this conversation. I feel like the first time we
Really?
spoke, yeah, honestly, like, and I'm just a pretty transparent guy, but the first time we spoke, I felt like it was a little bit of an awkward of a conversation. It didn't flow the way I
Oh,
hoped it would for no reason. Like, there was no agenda, but I felt uncomfortable and awkward. And like talking today publicly, oddly enough, it's an amazing conversation. And like, I'm really glad I got to share some of those stories. And like, honestly, this is going to sound really odd, but I feel like I'm a little emotional today. I watched a documentary last night about the Red Hot Chili Peppers called, like, it was like the rise of the Chili Peppers, Our Brother Hillel. And it's kind of telling the story of how their guitarist really helped drive that band to start. He unfortunately passed away really young as the band was just starting. And watching the interaction and the stories between them, the Chili Peppers, turned out to be one of the biggest bands in the world. But hearing the stories of them and their struggles when they were first starting reminded me so much of my own career that it was really touching. And like, I still, as the documentary got to the end and Flea was talking about when Hillel died, I could see that like this guy at 60, I think 63 years old, is still holding it personally that like he's partially responsible that this guy died. And like, I feel terrible for the guy. That's I don't think that's the case. Like drug addiction's an illness. Nobody's at fault for that illness. And just watching it, it reminded me of so many things in my own career that just has me really reflective today. So I'm glad you caught me on an incredibly reflective day. And as I told you, I'm going to share a part of our conversation before we started, but you asked me, is anything off limits to talk about? And I said, no, nothing's off limits. And if you ask me something I'm uncomfortable about, I'll tell you why it's uncomfortable and why I'm not going to talk about it. And like, I feel like if more of us could be this way, the world could be, a better place.
I totally agree with you, and I really appreciate you mentioning how you felt awkward on our first call too. Which, it's interesting because honestly, I felt a little bit intimidated, and the reason why is because you accomplished so many things in your career that I wanted to accomplish myself. And being an artist manager, I mean, don't get me wrong, I love every single artist that I've ever worked with. And this has nothing to do with that at all. It was the drive for me and sometimes the frustration that I wanted to see my artists succeed. I wanted them to see their goals be accomplished and to go to the next level and beyond that fact. And outside of a couple, that never really happened. And so for me, it's admiring your career so much because it was not only because also I'm obviously huge in alternative music scene, so the bands that you worked with over the years, but on top of that too is that you were able to do so many things and get to a level that I've only been able to just grasp at. And so for me, it was, it's just one of those things of, and that's why I was so glad to hear all these conversations with you and so forth. And also just coming to terms with myself about, the accomplishments that I've made in my career, but also just, taking away what's the most important, which are those relationships. And I think that's something I have to constantly remind myself is that I may have not gotten the success that I was hoping for in both my own career and the careers of the artists that I worked with. But, that's what matters most at the end of the day, because you can't control anything else. I mean, you can work as hard as you can, and there's just so much that has to go right for those things to work out.
Yeah, and we all just have a skewed perception of ourselves sometimes and minimize, either on purpose or by accident, what we've been good at. Like my favorite band of all time is probably the Ramones. And the Ramones influenced multiple generations of music. You don't have Green Day without the Ramones. You don't have Blink without the Ramones. You don't have the majority of the artists I ever worked with without the Ramones. And if you read the history or watch the documentaries on that band, they talk about how they're a failure and they never succeeded as a band. And they drove culture almost as much as like the Beatles or, like the most important bands. Like they're up there on that level. They just didn't have the commercial success, but they drove so many genres of music and were important, even if they only had one gold record and never sold more than 2,000 or 3,000 tickets a market in the US at their prime. But, like we're all going to look at ourselves and be like, I wish, and that's kind of what's good about being human is, we want to drive to do more. If we're just happy with what we did, then, like how are we going to drive to do more?
Exactly. Well, we can start wrapping things up here. I just have one quick question for you before we end things, and that is, if you were only able to give one piece of advice, what would that one piece of advice be?
Be honest. It's just like I could expand on it a little more, but there's been a few times over my career where people have come to me and lied about things, either trying to get something or trying to sell me. But just be honest and don't be an a-hole. Like, I've given this advice to a bunch of people to say, like, be honest. We are in showbiz, so smoke and mirrors is fine, but be honest too.
I totally agree. Well, thank you so much, Randy. This was such a great conversation, and yeah, we'll make sure that everything's in the show notes. But thank you so much again for doing this. I really appreciate it.
Thanks for having me. This was fun.